Good afternoon, early evening, or whatever time of day it is to all you lovely folks joining us for another edition of the CGBytes Artist Development Seminars, fumbling included, live, presented to you by yours truly, Les from 6S1, brought to you by the good folks at, as I mentioned, CGBytes. Got some folks hanging out in the chat already today. Very cool. Some folks joined me for a little pre-show run-up time where I was doing a little bit of modeling and just kind of spitballing some stuff and tinkering with some of the great new features in Zbrush 4R8. So, where are we going today? Okay, today's theme, today's show is all about rigging, specifically rigging mechanical figures like the mech. So this is the next installment of our mechanical series. And I need to fix that. There we go. That was bugging me. So I have already got this guy rigged and in place. So I'm going to show you sort of our target. I'm going to start off at the end for once and kind of show you the goal. So here we have the mech that you guys have been joining me while I've been building this thing over the last couple of weeks. And yeah, you guys might pick up a little bit of breathing noises. My allergies are just killing me today, so I'm trying to keep the mic just far enough from my mouth that it doesn't pick up on my excessive nasal crapola. So somebody mentioned that in the chat. Yay for summer in Ohio. So here we have the mech you guys have been watching get built over the last few weeks, and the functionality on this is really solid. I'm very pleased with where this has ended up. So let's take a look at some of the different elements here. And the reason I'm showing you guys kind of the ending first is really because a lot of times how you'll approach building something is very much defined or at least assisted by how clear your vision is of where it's going to be in the end. That's why in film and games environments we use a lot of concept art. There's a lot of concept sculpting, concept drawing, all that sort of stuff to really nail down the idea before getting into all the nuts and bolts of modeling it and rigging it and all that. Because the clearer your concept is, then the more efficiently you can work when you're building the object. So here I want to show you. I kind of had a very clear vision in mind of where I was going with this thing, with how I wanted the legs to move, how I had this engine in mind. That's kind of the core of the piece. The engine and the hull are the two most important parts. The hull's where the character sits, and the engine's what drives it. So I thought it'd be kind of neat if we had, on this mech, had these legs that could pivot somewhat. And give me just a moment. Let's just set that to do not disturb. I thought it'd be kind of cool to have these legs that would pivot, so it could wiggle around into different places, and it just offers another point of articulation and movement that would be really kind of neat. So we started out with this this little joint right here, and then I have this sort of ball socket rotational joint. It's really just a hinge, but I like the idea of this giant ball socket. Something about that just kind of appealed to me artistically. Thought it was neat looking. And so here we have each of these pieces. Okay, that little guy right there I probably need to set some limits on. And there you can see there's some movement in this piston as the leg bends. So we're going to look at some of those kind of things today. So let's just let's pop into this then. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to export an OBJ of this just to have to work with. There's a few nifty little things about that. So let's export. I just want to make sure that I have one of these saved out. And I probably have my resolution cranked up. Yes. Dope. We need to do that. That's better. Okay. So let's import that mesh. I'll show you some interesting things and important things about the meshes that you save for rigging, and some little tricks and tidbits about meshes that are for mechanical rigs like this. There's, artistically speaking, there's no end to what you can do with science fiction and mecha type designs. So I highly encourage people to explore this, because these things are consistently, like from a marketing standpoint, from a professional standpoint, they're consistently strong sellers. You can do designs that are clunky and military, or smooth and elegant. You can do all kinds of cool artistic things with them, and people really seem to embrace that. It's a really popular sector of our market, which is why I chose to kind of focus on this for a little while, because I feel like there's a lot of opportunity out there for people to do really cool creative things with kind of robotics and science fiction stuff and all that sort of technological stuff that we don't really think about a lot, because most of the time we're so focused on organics, clothing, which clothing's kind of a form of organic modeling, you know, clothing, organics, characters, things like that, that we don't, in the Poser and Daz Studio community, we don't really focus that much on hard surface modeling and hard surface rigging and stuff that goes with it. And I think that's a shame, and that probably accounts too for why there's a bit of a hole in the market when it comes to that kind of content. So I would invite you guys to take it as an opportunity, the things I've been showing over the last few weeks, as maybe inspiration and impetus to try and fill a little bit more of that hole in the market, because it's very popular. People dig it. So let's go import that mesh that I just saved out. And okay, so here we have that model, and I want to look at that in our geometry editor, which I keep my my tool settings docked over here at the side so that I can get to the settings for all my different tools. So here you'll see we have polygroups in place for all these different elements. So I like to pre-group my meshes, but you can do amazing amounts of grouping here inside inside Daz Studio. So, and the reason that we want to group those is that those polygroups, those face groups as they're called in Daz Studio, those face groups will become selection handles. We associate those with joints after we create the joints, and then those become our selection handles. So that allows us to click on, say, a leg or a hull or the hatch right there, and be able to actually have the bone selected. So when you're clicking on the model in the viewport in Daz Studio, you're not actually selecting the model, the mesh. You're selecting the joint that drives the model in that area. So like right here, I'm not actually selecting the left shin of that mech. I'm selecting the left shin joint. So understanding that kind of should help clarify a little bit of understanding about the importance of those groups. It's similar in function to what folks have grown used to or had grown used to with Poser, but there are some fundamental differences. Really, in DAZ Studio, those groups are only there as a selection tool, at least in this function. Whereas in Poser, the groups actually had a really intrinsic role to play in rigging. So that was a different sort of thing. So let's select our mesh, or our figure here that we imported, and I'm going to go back into my geometry editor, and let's just make a copy of this guy real quick. I'm going to have these on screen so you can see, these different copies that we're going to work with. So I want to show you guys some workflow for creating your face groups. So let's just go through here. I'm going to drag over all of these and remove them. And I could show you this too with the surfaces. And yeah, let's just do that too. Let's remove all those surfaces too. Let's just delete that one. So now we have no groups, no surfaces, nothing like that. It's just straight, uncorrupted model. So let's say we want to create the face group for the hull. Okay, I know this hull is contiguous. So if I select just a few polys on that hull, and here we're in selection mode is drag selection in the geometry editor. Sorry folks, I saw someone mention an audio glitch in the chat, so I wanted to double check and make sure I had all those channels turned off. You guys let me know, keep me posted on if that fixes the audio. If there's any issue there, I'll be sure to pop over and we'll troubleshoot that. Alright, so to get to your geometry editor, go to Window, Panes, and you can find that sorry, I'm having a bit of a brain fart there. Sorry, no, the geometry editor is under tools. The panes, there's all kinds of other things that get their own windows, but the geometry editor is actually a tool. You won't find that under window and panes. Don't know what I was thinking there when I started saying that, but that's where I was headed. I wanted to explain that it's not actually under windows and panes, it's a tool. So, and that's kind of an important thing to understand. In DAZ Studio, there are some things that you might think of as tools, but they'll show up under those windows. And then there are other things that you might think of would be windows that show up under tools. It's hard to really know why they chose one versus the other. I think it would have been a little more transparent if it were all just in the same thing, but whatever. So you go to Tools, Geometry Editor, and if you don't have your Tool Settings window, now that you'll find under Panes, Window, Panes, and then go down to Tool Settings. Okay, so when you select the Geometry Editor, if you don't have your Tool Settings docked into your interface like I do, the Tool Settings window should pop up. So when that does, I would highly recommend docking those tool settings because that is something that you're going to use constantly, and the tool settings window is going to give you the deep settings behind each of the different tools in the program. So that's a pane that you're going to have open pretty much all the time. I constantly have it open. So thinking about pre-grouping a mesh, which we can entirely do here inside DS, let's select a few polys on the hull, and then I'll hold the Control and number pad plus key and just hold that, and it'll start expanding my selection all the way out like that. There's a few other functions of the geometry editor that I want to point out, and some of these functions are also repeated in kind of a mini version of the geometry editor that sits inside the node weight map brush. So if we right click, you can see we get this menu that has all kinds of stuff in it, and then those open up into other things. We can go to geometry visibility and hide unselected, and here you see that entire shell of polygons that we just selected. So quite often in the course of grouping a mesh, you may want to hide polygons, hide or show different polygons, different sets of polygons. There's a lot of ways that works out for you as a handy tool to be able to hide things so you can see other areas and make selections that might be hard to reach otherwise. So here we have our hull. Another little handy tool inside the geometry editor that I use pretty frequently is this little guy down here called selection sets. Okay, a selection set, these are just temporary sets. So, you know, we can just say create selection set. I'm right clicking, create selection set from selected, and we'll just call this temp 1. So what that's going to do is give us an immediate means of getting that selection back at any point. So let's say I paint some polys on here and I want to add that selection to it. I can just grab it like that. Or I can right click and geometry selection, clear selection. I could just click the plus sign and add that selection. Or let's say that I've grabbed a whole pile of polygons and I want to remove that selection from them. Okay, like that. If I hit that minus sign, it will remove that. So it's sometimes nice to have these little selection sets sitting there as tools to add to and take away from different groups along the way. So let's grab that group, and then I'm going to show you now how to create your face groups that you'll need down the line. So let's right click. Here I've made the selection from that temp. You don't have to use the temp either. The temp I just used because I made it and it was convenient. You could just, like I started, select a few polys and then expand your selection all the way out. So now if I right click and I go down to geometry assignment, create face group from selected, and I'm going to call that hull. Now we have a poly group for the hull, and we can hide that, see things underneath it. Very handy. So there are a few other groups that we'll need to make for this. I know I'm going to need to make an engine. So there I've just selected all the polygons of the engine, and I'll right click, go down to geometry assignment, create face group from selected, and that will be my engine group. Then I know I'm going to need a group for the cockpit area because that got its own component. So I select all of the polygons to that, and we'll right click and go to geometry assignment, and we're going to create face group from selected, and that's going to be cockpit, I believe. And I'll just hide that. And I do believe that I want these guys right here involved in that. So this is kind of a nice opportunity to show you how to add polys to a group that you've made. So here I've selected the polygons for these vents, and I want to add those to the cockpit, so I'll just right click. Once I have them all selected, I'll right click over cockpit and hit assign selected faces to group. So now if I hide and show that group, you'll see those disappear or reappear with it. And then I believe I wanted this stuff added to my cockpit group. And before I stop and move on to another section, I'm going to grab polys for one of these joysticks here, one of these little yokes. I think I just called them stick. And so this one right here, I'm going to right click after I've selected it and name it L stick. And this one right here is going to be R stick. And the L and R in those names, it really doesn't matter in your poly groups, but I like to go ahead and make sure that my poly groups, that my face groups have names that are going to correspond to the joints that I'm going to create for them later. So since that's the case, I'm going to name them things like L stick, R stick, L thigh, R thigh, and use that. Like I said, I like to pre-group, so I'll name those things that way when I'm pre-grouping my mesh. That way I can look at my geometry editor, I can pop back in there and look at those things later on when I'm creating the joints and be able to see what those names are, and I can even copy and paste them out of there so that I keep clean naming between all that stuff. Okay, and then also having those named properly, then linking those groups to your joints the way I'm going to show you how will really make your life so insanely easy when it comes to doing skin weights, because even though it's mechanical, it does still use skin weights. And so that's something that this is a little bit of forethought to. So a lot of what we're doing with this and a lot of what I'm showing you is kind of taking this approach where there are things you might run into. Like if you just start with the model and start slinging bones into it and trying to rig it and all that stuff, you can get pretty far with that. But there's some forethought that can go into it that will make your life so many kinds of easier. And so pre-grouping that mesh is a big part of that. So here we have our sticks. Then I know that I want to pre-group this yoke, which I don't want all of this, and this is kind of a tricky little spot right here. So I don't want everything that this connects to. I just want to get this down to maybe right about here. And I'm using Control plus sign on my number pad and Control minus sign on my number pad to increase or decrease the selection. So once I have a clean selection for that poly group, I'm going to right click, go to geometry assignment, create face group from selected. That's going to be L yoke. You got to be yoking. No, I'm not yoking. I'm dead serious. Dead seriously not a comedian, that's for sure. So we're going to repeat that process with the right yoke. Right click, geometry assignment, create face group from selected, and that's going to be R yoke. And once we've created those groups, we can hide them. And I can see a few things that I missed. These little knobs these are just kind of there as greebles. They're just fun little shapes to have in place. So let's select some of those. Make sure we expand the selection until they're completely selected. And we're going to add those to our cockpit group. Then the last piece of the interior that we're going to be selecting is the console. So let's select all that. Go to geometry, assignment, create face group from selected. We'll call that console. And we missed a few pieces there, but that's okay because then we can hide this and then come back through and make a bunch of selections like so. And just assign those. And there we go. So I did miss these vents that are part of the cockpit, so we'll just go to selection mode, do a lasso selection, hold the control key and drag around that to add to our selection. And then there we go. So now we've gotten all our groups together for the interior. Then I want to create a group for the hatch. So I just drag a selection around all of that guy. Then we'll right click and go to geometry assignment, create face group from selected. And that's going to be hatch. And I hope you folks are taking note of the fact of how repetitious this is. It is a lot of repetitious stuff. You're going to do the same thing over and over. You're going to right click, go to that geometry assignment command over and over and over. So that's, I mean, it really is the nature of this thing. So let's see. I don't remember what I named that in those little engine pivot pieces. So let's take a look over here. Okay. So I called that engine joint. So then here this is going to be L engine joint. So we'll right click, go to geometry assignment, create face group from selected, L engine joint. And then I'll do the same over here. And that's going to be R engine joint. And we can hide those. And something like this, a lot of times the selection lasso is kind of my preferred tool rather than just painting across the surface. I find painting my selections is a little more intuitive on an organic model, whereas on mechanical models and props, getting my selections are oftentimes easier using a lasso. So, especially where I can just select some polys and then grow it to grab the entire shell. Yeah, in the chat, Dave Bates says, this is why it's so much better to set up your face groups in your modeler. I could not agree with you more. Could not agree with you more. Because, yeah, I actually set up, I'm showing you guys how to set up the groups here in DS, because obviously everyone here has DS. You can actually set up groups inside Zbrush, and maybe we'll do a little sidebar and look at that. You can't name them, which kind of sucks. But in Zbrush, it'll create groups, like any of the poly groups that you create in Zbrush, it will call them polygroup with a number. But those will import into DS. And so you could just go in and rename them. So the selection would still be made. So there's that. So you can do that within Zbrush. But I tend to do my pre-grouping inside Maya, because it's Maya. Maya is king for me. I mean, it really is. Just the tool set in there is so robust, and what you can do with polygon selections, just the way it all works, is just really fast for me. So let's see. Russ Barrett said, Les should sell this model. It is awesome. Well, thanks. I appreciate that. Actually, Russ, this model is to be included as the next installment in the ongoing Dark Void product line from CGBytes. So this thing should be available. Oh man, have to do some checking with. Have to talk it over with management and see what the game plan is on that. But it will be available in some form really, really, really soon. Really soon. I'm very, very tempted to see if we can't organize some of you folks here who might be interested in working on some hard surface stuff into a little group to make some add-ons for it, because man, I would love to see a fire department add-on for this. I don't know why, but I since I did that red texture on it last week, I'm like, oh my god, yes, let's make this thing a fire engine. That'd be so cool. But then the obvious is a military version that has, you know, guns and missiles and stuff. We could add mechanical arms underneath or on top of it. We could add, there's so much stuff we could do with it. And then the modular nature of how this is designed, we could actually kick out the legs that are on it and drop that hull down to the ground and add, you know, wheels. We could add tank tread. We could do all kinds of neat stuff with this thing. So yeah, I'm not sure where all that's going to go, but you know, the options are there. The like, this is meant to be a chassis. It's meant to be a you know, the building block that you could then go up to. And Terry said John Deere green. Yes, John Deere green on this thing. Yeah, a big mower. You know, it's like it's the concept for this is an all-purpose, all-terrain walking vehicle. You know, so I think that it would just be really cool to see where people take it. You know, I've even thought about an idea. Like I had this neat idea just looking at it and the way that it is designed, where we could take the legs off and socket that hull and engine into a larger base and actually have something set up kind of like God, I'm showing my age here, but when I was a kid I remember these cartoons where you had these different robots that would connect together or they would socket into some other bigger ship. I think it'd be so neat to have like a hub where like 2 or 3 of these socket in and their engines become a larger engine. Like they're all components to build something bigger, and then that has, you know, its own parts and all that. So there's so much cool stuff we could do, you know. But it's really a matter of there's a few moving parts behind the scenes to some things like this that we need to talk about. And but I would really love to see you guys embrace something like this and really take it to the next level, because I haven't seen that done with anything in this market. I just think it'd be so cool, and it presents so many cool opportunities for other products, because every one of these, like this guy right now, this ship as it stands, is a great opportunity for sets of poses, for male and female poses, for creatures to go in with it. There's so much we can do with that. So anyway, yeah, just let that stuff bounce around your heads a little bit, guys, because I think that would be really, really cool. And if there's some, if we get some feedback on that, then that will help me make some decisions about a number of things moving forward. So that'd be kind of nifty. So so anyway, I got kind of pulled into a sidebar with that, but I think it's a good one. It's some fun stuff. So here we have what's going to be our, I think it's L-leg top. Okay, and I noticed that I made a slight mistake in typing the name in there, so I'm just going to come over here to my geometry editor and correct that. And you just click and hold or double click, and then you can go in and change the name of those groups. So there we have L-leg top, and then once I have that, I'm going to hide it because that'll make getting the other selections easier. Then right click, we're going to do R leg top, and then we'll hide that. And then we're going to have L shin, and then here we will have R shin. Then I added this ankle joint right here that I thought was kind of cool. It's going to give us some articulation. So that one is going to be L ankle. Oop, and I forgot to add those to it. Sorry, there we go. And then R ankle. Then this was, I believe I called this L piston. Let's see. L foot piston. There we go. And so then that's going to be R foot piston. And let's hide those. Then, let's see. I forgot exactly what my naming was on these guys. I think that was R foot rear. Let's see, foot rear and foot front. So, oops. That's going to be L foot rear. That's going to be R foot rear. Then let's grab these, and these are going to be L foot front. And then R foot front. So let's hide all of those. And this is going to be our left foot. And this will be the right foot, R foot. Okay, so now that empty group can go away, we'll just right click on that, hit remove, and we can view all of this. So there we've created all of the face groups that we need to correspond with the rigging that we're about to build. So once we have those groups created, it's a good idea to go ahead and maybe export an OBJ of that just to be sure. That way you keep those groups, and if something goes wrong, you've got a backup of it. Since I like to fly by the seat of my pants pretty often, I'm not going to do that right now. But I've already got the model already finished. I've already got it rigged, so I don't really need to. But it's just a good little aside is, you know, from time to time, export an OBJ. Just save that. That way you've got something you can go back to. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do now is convert this to a figure. Then we'll start adding joints. Okay, we'll start putting bones in. So here, let's look at my finished one, because that's a nice reference for where we're going to go with this. And we have our root, our hull, engine. Here's what the hierarchy for that's going to look like. So let's select this ATW, and then we'll go to Edit, Object, Rigging, Convert Prop to Figure. Then when this pops up, we want to set this to General Weight Mapping. don't want any skeleton inheritance because this is an entirely original figure, it has no parent, then the root bone of this is just going to be, I think we called that, yeah, let's just call that ATW for now. And we can always change that. So, like here, our root bone was hull. So let's go in here and select this bone, and we'll rename that. Okay. Let's go into our joint editor tool, and once you're in there, let's right-click and hit Edit, Rename, and we're going to call that hull. And Reggie asks, Les, when you are typing in names, are you using spaces or caps? I use no spaces. I lowercase the first letter, and then everything after that gets a capital letter at the beginning of a word. Someone here who probably is a little more versed in programming can tell me I know there's a name for that typing format, and I cannot for the life of me remember it right now. But I've been typing that stuff that way forever now, and it's really handy because it cuts out those dead spaces and the little %20s and all that kind of stuff from your code. It makes it easier to read in code, and makes it easier to make selections. Like if you have to actually edit something in a text editor, you can find things really easily that way. Alright, now we're going to assign a polygroup to our hull joint here, and we'll do that within the joint editor. And actually where we named that hull, and it is the root joint, and there was already a group there called hull, it's already linked that up for us. It's rather nice of it. So we also want to look at rotation order, and rotation order is really, really important because it deals with the order in which the program is going to look at a joint, which is also going to give us the order in which different rotations come up in your parameters list. So right now, by default, this has been created at Y up, Y, X, Z. So I don't think that's what I wanted, though. Let's go and look at my finished one and see what I chose. YZX. YZX is what I want with this. So we can just click on rotation order and we'll change that to YZX. Okay. And then if we click and drag, you can see this tiny little handle here. If we click and drag that handle, you can see we can change the pivot point. The green handle on joints is the origin point of a joint, and the red handle is its end point. So you can move those handles and change where that joint starts and stops. It doesn't have anything to do with any kind of influence that it has, but it does do have everything to do with where it's going to pivot and how it's going to interact with the other joints around it. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to do is start adding other joints that we need. I will tend to work in the order of what we have in our geometry editor, or the groups that we created in the geometry editor. And for the sake of full disclosure, I am going to tell you there are ways to script a lot of this process. There are some real fast methods for this, but they really require that you have everything absolutely correct before you use them. Primarily what they're going to do is look at the groups in an OBJ and create joints based on that. So before I show you anything automated like that, I want you to have a clear understanding of the joints themselves, how they work, what they're about, and how to create new ones. So here we have our hull joint, and I'm going to right click, hit create, create child bone, and the next bone I'm going to create is going to be the hatch. Actually, let's do cockpit next. That was the next thing in the order that we created the polygroups. So we'll do cockpit, and I want that one to have a ZYX rotation. And I will typically choose my rotation based on the orientation of an object. So the cockpit tends to be more forward than up in nature. So I will create that with that rotation, and then we'll just move its origin and endpoints down. Then after the cockpit, we want the, let's see, what else did we want? After the cockpit, we're going to go to the console. So then let's right click with our joint editor and go to create child bone. We're going to call that console, and we want to keep its orientation the same, so ZYX. Then children of the console are going to be the yolks, so we'll create child bone L yoke, and we're going to make that one a YZX because those yolks, actually no, we're going to keep that ZYX. So ZYX, accept, and remember, if we go into wireframe, we can probably see through this somewhat. Or even better than that, this is so handy sometimes when you're working on something, is to go into your geometry editor and just hide things you don't need. So let's get rid of the hull for a moment, and then the cockpit and the engine. So now we can see those elements really clearly. So here we have the L yoke, and I'll just move its origin and endpoint, then right click and hit align. And since that is offset from the center, we need to go to the front and move that into place. We'll just hide that hatch there so we can see that. And we can look at this from a rear view, back view. And then just move that into place. Now, when I want to create a joint that's on the opposite side, all I really need to do is right click and go to create sibling bone. Then I'm going to need to select that sibling. You'll see that it comes up with the same name, and they've appended an _2 after it. So I'll select that and then right click, go to edit, rename, and then I'll just take off that suffix and then change the L to beginning to an R. So now we have L yoke and R yoke, and if I select L yoke and then I right click and go to edit, mirror joints, now you see that it moves its position and everything over to the right yoke. That is going to happen with any joints that you create. So whenever you're creating a chain of joints that needs to be reflected on the opposite side, you still have to create all the opposing joints. But when you copy, when you're finished, you can tell it to mirror, and it will copy those across based on the L or R prefix on the naming. every once in a while you're drawing in bones, it's a good idea, in my opinion, to right click and go down to memorize figure rigging. If you notice, once we mirrored that joint, you see all of these different numbers in our joint editor become highlighted. It's because those things are showing up changed. If we were to right click and do a restore figure rigging, you'll see all those joints snap back to exactly where they started at when they were created. So from time to time, you want to right click and hit memorize figure rigging, and now those things locked off. So if we were to right click now and go down to restore figure rigging, it's going to leave us with exactly what we have there because we just memorized all of that rigging in place. It's kind of an important little thing there. Okay, so the last pieces of our cockpit that we need to work out are going to be the console and the sticks. So, oh, and it looks like actually I made a mistake when I put these in, which is fine because this mistake is a learning experience for you guys. I accidentally created those yolks as children of the console when I need those to be children of the cockpit if I want to conform to what I've already done. So let's go to L yoke. I'll right click, still with my joint editor tool. Right click and go to edit, reparent bone, and here I can just choose that new parent, which is going to be cockpit. Hit accept. We'll push through that, and I'll do the same with R yoke. Right click, go to edit, reparent. Okay, so now let's select the console. And I'm going to move that joint around just a little tiny bit, just because. And then we now want to add our left and right stick as children of the console. So I'm going to right click and go to create child bone. This is going to be L stick. And since these are oriented upward, I'm going to set them to be YZX, and you'll see how as soon as I set that, when they create, that joint comes in pointed upward. So YZX, then I'll generally align it to one of those sticks. Now we'll go to a front view, and just like we did with the yoke, actually, let's go to the back view. Just like we did with the yoke, I'm going to move that over, kind of align it with what I know it's going to go with. And now I'm going to create a sibling joint. So we'll right click and hit create sibling bone. And again, that has the _2 after it. So we need to select it, right click, go to edit, rename node. We're going to take that 2 off there, and then add an R to the beginning in both of these fields. Now if I select L stick, right click, edit, mirror joints, you'll see that it mirrors the right stick. And once I've completed adding those joints, I'm going to memorize my figure rigging again, make sure that everything stays put. So now we're ready to add joints for the hatch, the engine joints, and the legs. So let's go to our hull, go to a side view, we'll choose left. I'm going to right click, create child, right click, create child bone. That's going to be hatch. And we're going to give that a ZYX. And as I've gone through here, I kind of got in a groove creating these bones, and I didn't go ahead and assign them to their polygon groups as I went. You really don't have to do that at the same time. It's kind of a good practice, and I caught myself just now with it. So I'm going to take a second and go through and just using the joint editor, start walking through these. Like select a joint, and then go reassociate it by choosing the poly group that it goes with from this list. Okay. So that gets all of the joints we've created so far. Then, let's see, we need the engine. Yes, engine. Okay. So let's go to the hull. Then we're going to create child bone. We're going to call that engine. Make that a ZYX. And its selection group is engine. Just move that joint into place. And sometimes it's a little tricky trying to get the end points exactly where you want them. So when that happens, I can just come over here into my joint editor, and let's give that a different value. Let's maybe make that something much smaller. Alright. There we go. There's the handle. There's the handle on the engine. That's what I wanted. I was trying to find that handle. Sometimes it kind of gets lost on screen. Let's do the same thing with the hatch too. That doesn't need to be sitting there like that. Okay, so here we have our engine. Let's add, let's see, what was that? L engine joint. Let's create child L engine joint, and we're going to want to keep this XYZ because this is going to be where the leg pivots from. Okay, and I don't want this joint to move from the center. I want to keep it pivoting down the center because I want these plates. You see how these engine joints right here, if I go over to this guy, if I select one of these engine joints, you'll see how it rotates. It's because it's pivoting from the dead center of the figure. So let's get that engine joint into place. Let's just move that guy right down here. And then come up here and add that group to it. So from here, we're going to continue this process on out the leg, and we'll repeat for the other leg and then mirror those joints over. And you're going to see here in a moment how mirroring works when we choose it recursively. The same thing that we do for mirroring one of those single joints like you saw on the stick and the yoke, we'll be able to do for the legs and have it take all those positions and go all the way down through all those joints. So at the moment, though, we are going to take our usual break. You know, every week at about an hour in, we take a little break so everybody can stretch and have a moment, grab a drink or whatever, and kind of get settled in for the next hour. So I'm going to do that. Before I do, I'm going to take a quick scan back through the chat and see if anyone has any questions before we take our little pause. So let's see. Looks like everyone's kind of on the same page so far, so that's good. So I'm going to take that short break, grab some coffee, and be right back. You folks have fun, talk amongst yourselves for a minute. Try to think of any questions or anything you might have, and I'll and pop them into the chat, and I'll get on those as soon as we get started again. So be back in just a moment. All right, I am back. Let's see if we have anything posted in the chat. Doesn't look like anything, so cool. I'm going to assume everyone is with me. Before we press on with this, we need to draw some more bones in there. Once I get this copy of this rig in place with these bones drawn in, I'll show you guys a little trick for kind of sidestepping all that. But it's really good to be able to draw those bones in, because in other types of figures, let's say you're working on clothing or something like that, where you want to add joints to an existing rig, well, with that you can't script it. You have to do them by hand. So it's nice, it's a good practice to go through on an original figure and do those by hand a time or two, just so you get in the habit of it and you know where all those things are, so that you know where to go when you need it. So let's come in here to our engine joint, and pardon me, I have a bit of a sniffle here. Good old allergies. I'm going to take that engine joint and create a child. So create child bone, and that is going to be L leg top. And I want to make sure that its rotation order is set to YZX. Now let's go to a front view. And I'm going to move its center point to where I can tell that it's roughly dead center of that big pivot there. And can you guys hear me okay still? Just want to make sure I didn't screw anything up while I stepped away. Okay, cool. Good deal, good deal. Making sure that I didn't accidentally have my mic muted. I need to put like a little piece of tape or a mark or something by that so I can tell which one is which, because it's not actually delineated. It's just a little switch, so you don't always know, know if it's on or off. All right. Now let's just scoop this in along the Z-axis. Thank you guys for bearing with me today, because my allergies are just absolutely acting up, and it's horrible. Like I feel like I'm sitting here kind of getting sleepier and sleepier. So, but I just during the break went and hit some nasal spray. Woohoo! Crack those sinuses open. So hopefully I'll be a little more lively going into this other half. And no, by nasal spray I do not mean cocaine. It's actually nasal spray. We'll leave the cocaine for my brothers. And if only I were joking. Alright, so I want to show you guys a little trick here with drawing joints in. You'll see that when I move that end point, it doesn't actually follow, it just gets longer or shorter. It's kind of silly. I wish they didn't make it like that. But if I right click and I go into align and I tell it to auto align node, then it will snap to that as I move it. Now I want to go ahead and memorize my figure rigging before I do that, because sometimes the auto align node can really screw things up. Like right there, as soon as I click and drag on that, you'll see that it actually alters other joints. See how they snapped? So I'm going to use that to manipulate this joint and get it where I want it, and then I'll freeze or memorize just this joint and then restore the rest of the figure. So now all that stuff gets back. So remember, the couple times I've made a real big point of saying, oh, memorize your figure rigging, memorize your figure rigging. Well, if you don't memorize your figure rigging and you turn on that auto align, then it can all end in tears. So I try to avoid that at all costs. So you want to memorize that figure rigging, then we can use the auto align so that as we're drawing our joints in, we can then control where they end up more easily, and then be able to restore all the other joints that we don't want to have that effect. So one of the things I like doing, and I've already done this once, you can see I've got the hull hidden, is I'll go through and hide things as I draw joints in, because it makes it easier to see like where my pivot points need to be and things like that. So let's take the L leg top and hide that one. We're just going to hide that the poly group for that. Of course, I call it poly groups. It shows how much time I spend in Zbrush. In here, it's called face groups. Every program's got its own little things for all that stuff. Hopefully you guys can follow along with that though. So here I'm going to grab my joint editor, and from the side. I'll turn on wire texture shaded, and I'm going to make sure that that is really aligned to like the center point that I can see inside that socket. Then I'll memorize just the selected node rigging and restore the rest of my rigging. Then the next thing I want to do is create my shin joint. So let's right click and go to create child bone. And this is going to be L shin with a YZX rotation. And since I have auto align node turned on, now I can just grab that and drag it into place. And then if I move it, I can see the hinge behind that joint, and I can just move its origin point there. Okay. I want to put its end point right where the next joint is going to start. And let's make sure we go ahead and set our poly groups that go with these. So here on L leg top, let's choose that one. Then on L shin, there we go. So now let's right click and create a child bone. This one is going to be L ankle. Again with a YZX, and it's really important that on chains of joints like this they have the proper rotation order, because if they don't, when you go to try and use IK in the viewport, the results will be interesting. Interesting is a polite way of putting it. Also broken as hell is another good way to put it. So let's just associate the polygon group with that one now. So there's L ankle. And then next is going to be the foot. Foot bone connected to the ankle bone. L foot. And it's a YZX. And we're just going to drag it straight down and go grab its selection group, L foot. Okay, now when I create this toe group or foot front group, that's going to, if I have this auto snap on, that's going to cause the foot group to kind of go wonky for a minute. So I want to make sure right now that I memorize my figure rigging. That way I can restore that foot. So now let's create child bone. We'll call this L foot front. And we want a ZYX rotation order on that. And I'm going to move that so that its pivot falls right about here. And then I'm going to create a sibling bone to that. And sibling bones inherit the name of the bone that was selected when you created them. So then I will right click, go to edit, rename node, and it's going to be L foot rear. And we'll just drag that point back on it. Now let's right click and memorize our figure rigging. Okay, so now we have all the joints down our left side that we need. Next, we're going to create the joints down the right side. And when we make these joints, we don't really need to worry at all about their placement. We do need to be concerned about their rotation order, because when we mirror joints, rotation order does not mirror. And so if you don't have your rotation order correct, not only will, rotation order doesn't
mirror, but then the actual joints themselves won't mirror, and it will stop the mirroring at whatever point that the chain differs from the side you're trying to copy over. So getting that right is really, really important. So let's click on L engine joint. We know that one's an XYZ. And I'm just going to make mental note of all the other joints along the way. So everything all the way down from to the foot is a YZX. Oh, and we do have our groups we need to put in here. So there's L foot front and then L foot rear. Okay. No. Incorrect. There we go. L foot front. L foot rear. L foot. Okay, cool. So, and you can navigate through this just by selecting a joint in the scene tab and using the up and down arrow keys. Very handy. So everything from L leg top down to L foot is a YZX. Then the secondary parts of the foot are ZYX. So we have one XYZ, handful of YZXs, and then two ZYXs. So let's go to the engine, create child bone, R engine joint, and that's going to be an XYZ. Then we're going to create a child bone from that. Actually, let's go ahead and associate it. Let's just get in the habit of doing this all together. Then create child bone, R leg top, and that's a YZX. And another handy little thing that I like to do, since I'm very lazy about typing, is a lot of times I'll just select the name from in here and copy it. So now we'll create child, and I'll just type an R and paste. Select that. Then we'll right click, create child, R, paste. And create child. See a pattern here? R and paste. So now here's my left foot front. Create child bone. And that one's a ZYX. We'll go back to the R foot, create child bone, and give that a ZYX. Okay, so now we have all the joints corresponding down the right as to what we have on the left. So now I'm going to go to my L engine joint, right click, go to edit, mirror joints, and we want selected recursive. So now you see all those joints popped right into place down the side, and as soon as they do, we'll right click and go memorize figure rigging. I do notice that I left out my piston joints. So let's go over and insert a couple of joints in here. Let's go to the, let's go to the L ankle. I believe that's what that's parented to. Yes. So we'll go to the left ankle, right click, create child bone, and we want the L foot piston. And I'm just going to go ahead and select that name. And that's going to be a YZX. And I'll go to a left view and let's just align that roughly in here. And memorize figure rigging. Pardon me. And we need to do the same on the right foot. So let's create child bone, R foot piston, YZX. Oh, and I accidentally put that on the foot instead of the ankle, so let's just reparent that. There we go. Now if I come back over to the piston joint on the left side, we go to edit, mirror joints, and there we go. So with that, we have all of the joints created for our mech. I need to go through and do my polygon associations here. So let's do R foot rear, R foot front, R foot, R ankle, R shin, I think should be good. Nope, R shin, and R leg top. Alright, so now I'm going to go back into my geometry editor and we will unhide everything. And now if I take my pointer tool, you can see that if I click on any of these parts of the mech, we now are selecting the corresponding joints. Now if we grab any of these joints and we try to move them, you'll see that only the bounding box moves. That's because there's nothing bound to those joints yet. So joint binding is kind of the next thing to do in the process, and there's a really easy way to do that, or that I like to do that, on a figure like this. Now there's a little caveat here. I'm going to show you a trick for binding mechanical items that will work really well if you kind of prepare for it. If you have a design that doesn't require any kind of smooth bending, anything that's real rubbery and things like that, then this will work great. If it's all mechanical, it's all hard stuff, it's all hard hinges, bends, slides, things like that. But if there's anything that has an organic sort of nature to it, that is rubbery or whatever, then you're going to end up, you can still use this, but you'll have to go in afterwards and do some weight editing. So that's kind of the caveat there. But this is an entirely or almost entirely hard surface piece. There's actually two pieces in here that I do have some slight skin weight work going on with, but we won't be getting into that right now because I want to just show you this method. So here, let's select any joint, doesn't even matter which one, and I'm going to go into my node weight map brush, and here you see none of these joints have any weight listed with them. Everything is listed on the hull. Well, if I right click now and go down to weight editing, I can choose fill by bone selection, and that is this area where those poly groups that we made that correspond to these bones, and then we associated those all together. This is where that comes into play, because beyond just being able to select the joints in the viewport through those poly selections, if we select this, Now you'll see that all of those vertices are locked to their respective joints. Right? So at this point, I want to take a quick look at the chat and see if you guys. I see what you guys are talking about. By the way, I'm watching. I know. I see some chatter going on over there about some tasty beverages. And given that it is early July and a holiday weekend, I would love to be joining y'all for some of those. But at the moment, we have a mech to rig, and I want to check and see if you folks have any questions so far. Let's see. Russ says Terry's being a bad influence. Terry, when are you not being a bad influence? So you guys, any questions so far on what I've been showing you with the joints, creating those joints, mirroring, all that kind of groovy stuff? Terry said something about robot soccer when I started moving the legs around. That's great. That would be cool. Let's see. There's another potential product to make out of this. Another cool set is wouldn't it be neat to see teams of these things playing some kind of giant mecha soccer game? You know, Robot Soccer League. That would be super cool. That would make a great game, actually. That's a really. I'm gonna hold on to that. That's a great game idea. Some kind of over-the-top mecha soccer game. Maybe testing with Unity. You know, the funny thing is, this mesh is light enough that it would run in Unity like a boss. We could totally take that into Unity and make something out of it and have a lot of fun with that. Nick Silver says England already plays soccer like they're robots. You know, being the American that I am, regretfully, I'm not involved in soccer. I don't get into soccer. I actually don't get into really any sports at all, to be honest. But my understanding from my British friends is that soccer is quite the passionate affair over there. So you guys, that sounds like some issues there. Let's see. Reggie says, less on the feet. I see a front and back, but this two areas is in a right front, left front, or right back, left back. What we have going on the feet, hold on just a second. I'll show you on the finished mech over here. We have this little guy, these little toes, and then we have these rear little toes right here. Okay. So, and the reason I put those in there like that is so that we could move this, and then when it needs to go back and be rotated, we'd be able to have this sort of toe control. So we could be able to get some little subtle bend in it. Alright, so let's take this little guy. Now that I've shown you how to do the joints by drawing them in, let's just move him out of the way. Whoop. And oh, just that little mistake there, that little screw up that you saw. Let's just look at that for a second. So right now you see we can grab any of these joints and they will actually move like anywhere. That's because when you draw joints in, the program doesn't know to lock off translations. Okay, so if you're working on a figure and you run into this, you'll need to lock off those those translations. So we want translations on for the hull, but not any of this other stuff. So what I will do is just select that next joint down, which is the cockpit, and then I'll hold the I'm going to hold my shift key and select everything downstream. So I want all of those joints selected. This is a handy thing. I am absolutely in love with this functionality in DS. This is something that actually every 3D program out there, like even the big dogs, could take a cue from. Here I can select all of these joints and just drag over this and get all of their parameters up. So right now we have all these parameters together, and I'm going to go into edit mode and then shift select all three translations. So right now you see that number tells us we have 24 joints selected. So I'm going to right click and go to lock selected. Then I'm going to go to hidden and hide selected. So once we have locked and hidden those, now if I select one of those joints, oh, excuse me, I actually don't want that locked. What am I thinking? Isn't this magical? Let's grab all these guys again. Oh, chew. Alright, and we're going to drag down. We don't want them locked, but we do want them hidden. So lock, unlock those. Let's make them hidden. So now we should be able, there we go. That's what we want. So now whenever we grab and pull on that, it invokes that under the hood IK that DS has in it, and it makes things try to stay in place sort of in relation to the joints around them, but they won't just move off of the hierarchy. Terry says, why am I flashing on real steel? You know, you could do some real steel type stuff like this. The kind of stuff I'm showing you, you could totally rig up robots like we're in that. Those were cool. That was actually a good movie. Let's see. I actually want to flip back over to the chat real quick here. That's great. You know, the idea of doing some kind of mecha soccer would be pretty neat, you know? You got mechs out there, maybe like build some kind of little basket or arm thing underneath them that could, I don't know, like do different stuff. There's all kind, like you could do all kinds of stuff with mecha sports, you know, like mecha highlight would be neat. Of course, now I'm hearing Pee Wee Herman saying mecha high, me ho. But, you know, you could do all kinds of cool stuff, you know, like mecha with a big arm that throws some kind of energy ball back and forth. And, you know, like, oh, man, there's all kinds of crazy stuff you could do. Could you imagine, too, like if you borrowed from American football where you've got a line of guys who slam into each other, you know, you could have some mechs that are your linemen and others that are, you know, some that are rigged for speed and others that are rigged for demolition. And you could have so much fun with this stuff. And it's funny too, because one of the things that just having a conversation like that during the live show here, one of the things that brings to mind for me that's always kind of been in the back of my head, it's a little sidebar that I'm going to toss out there, is here we are in this community, this little industry, this little cottage industry that we've built. And we make this stuff day in and day out. We turn out so much content, it's just crazy. And a lot of it at very, very high production quality. boggles my mind that no one has corralled talent together out of this community yet to try and do some kind of an indie game. That really blows my mind. Seems like a shame. Anyway, so the next thing I want to show you guys, now that I've shown you how to lock off those translations and everything, because that's a really important thing, is how we can automate the creation of all those joints. So here I'm going to go into a different tab, and I don't think you guys have ever seen me use this one before. This is a little thing in here called Figure Setup, and it's kind of cool. This is some groovy stuff. This is similar for folks who have used Poser and done any kind of figure rigging inside Poser. In Poser, you have a scene view. You have a hierarchy view, it's called in there. It's similar to the scene view in here, where you see things in a hierarchical list. You can drag them and parent them and do all kinds of things like that. Well, the scene tab here in DS doesn't work like that. I mean, you can parent and reparent things, but you can't. There are certain things that the hierarchy editor in Poser does that the scene tab here doesn't. But that same functionality of being able to save out a figure from that hierarchy editor is present in DS in the form of the Figure Setup tab. And so with this Figure Setup tab, what we can do is we have two panes in this tab. One is the geometry pane, and the other one is relationships. Okay, and let's go ahead and set this to parametric rigging first. And that's going to, whenever we create a figure through that, by default, it's going to have instead of skin weights, it's going to have the old parametric rigging similar to Poser. And the reason that I like to do that is that in the Figure Setup window, we only have parametric and triax types of rigging. We don't have general weighted as an option. So what I like to do is I'll use parametric, and then after it's all set up, we'll convert that to general. So the first thing we need to do if we're going to use the Figure Setup tab to get a figure jump started is we'll right click and hit Add Geometry. And so here I'm going to go grab ATW. That's All Terrain Walker. And our ATW mesh is going to come in, and you'll see that it has all our groups in it that we made. So we exported that OBJ, and we got all those cool groups there. So from there, we just drag this OBJ over into the other pane, just drop it right where it says geometry, and now you'll see all that stuff shows up in this list. This is really how I would go about building, and this is how I built the final version of this mech. I wanted to make sure that I used the mech as a demonstration piece to show you guys how to draw those bones in. Like I said, it's important that you know how to do that stuff, but there's a lot of the things that we do, there are multiple ways to get there. And the way that I like to build the rig for something, for a figure like this, is by auto-generating these joints through the Figure Setup tab. And just as a sidebar, since earlier today we had some conversation about Max and Maya, and then there was just a little bit of conversation about games. There's been mention of Unities. Well, all kinds of cool non-DS stuff come up in conversation today, and I dig that. Just this is an interesting little tidbit. One of the times that I do whip out DS, if I'm working on like a game project or a film project, so, something over in the high-end, I hate that term so much, high-end 3D world, is I like being able to auto-generate these rigs. And DAZ Studio has an excellent FBX exporter. It exports to the FBX format like nobody's business. It's really kind of amazing. And because of that, things that I build and rig inside DS, a lot of that rigging, at the very least, the joints, their orientations, and their skin weights, all of that can go straight into Maya. And that is so handy. Actually, it can go straight into game engines too. And I actually just recently completed a project for the University of Cincinnati Biochemical Research Department animating a rat
really oddball project. But the rat was built for a number of reasons. I already had some rigs that I could use. I had a few different assets I could bring to the game, from my catalog, and so I was able to bring those in through DAZ Studio and actually build them up in there and do all of the animation for this game project or game engine project for University of Cincinnati inside DAZ Studio. I actually didn't animate a single frame of that project anywhere else. So that's kind of cool. I mean, when you think about it, we're able to take a free program and use it to do work on that level. That's kind of awesome. I mean, that excites me. That's cool. You know, that kind of thing excites me because when I think about that and how I can apply that, what that tells me then is that all you guys, you know, all the folks, you know, I hear people talk all the time, well, I don't have the money for Maya, I don't have the money for this or that or the other. You've got DAZ Studio. At the very least, you got DS and you got Blender. Between those two, you can do just about anything. And I am actually working kind of on the side to try to boost my Blender skills a little bit so I can share some things with you guys out of that world. But still, the fact that I'm able to take DAZ Studio and animate in it and take that straight into Unity or Unreal, you know, the Unreal Engine, it's amazing. I mean, there's so many things that just changes the game on, and it brings the cost of entry into those markets down to really nothing but time and effort. So, and something like this mech is a great example of that. This mech can totally go straight into an engine like that. So that's just something I wanted to kind of point out because it's really interesting that we could do that. Like, I can use DAZ Studio as an intermediary tool to take a piece like this. We could use it as an rigging and animation tool to take it into a game engine. We could also use it as a rigging tool or a jump start using this figure setup tab to create a rig that can then go straight into Maya or some other program. So let's see. I noticed some chatter in the chat. Linda says, I maybe want to test how this will look in VR. Oh, yeah, that would be cool. Okay, I see where Terry said once Les is done talking, we can get his input. You guys let me know what you're... See, it looks like I need to read back through here. You guys have been up to something. Yeah, let me know what kind of input you need in here. And if somebody can boil it down for me real quick so I don't have to, like, take time out too long to read too deep into things. If there's ideas floating around out there, by all means, shoot them by me and let's see if we can do something. I think that'd be great. It's kind of been kind of a secret little desire of mine for a long time with this whole group and these seminars and all that, to eventually try to find ways to turn them into group projects and encouraging people to work together and all that kind of stuff. So if there's some chatter, some conversation going on about that sort of thing, by all means, let it fly. Let me hear what you guys are thinking about, because that kind of stuff's cool. So anyway, back to where I was at. We have our figure setup editor over here, and we have imported geometry, then dragged that geometry over onto our geometry node. Then we want to go through and set all of our rotation orders. And so you can set, this is kind of handy too, you can set multiple rotation orders from in here. So let's go, let's do the right leg from our leg top down to the right, let's see, there's right ankle, piston, let's see. Oh, okay, I have a couple of extra joints in there too. A couple of extra pieces that I'd forgotten about. Okay, that's fine. Let's go from there down to the right foot. Go. And set those to YZX. And
Actually, let's change that back, set those to X, Y, Z. Before we do any of that, we should go through and just set up our hierarchy. So what we'll do is collapse each of these. Okay. So here we're just going to build our hierarchy up. So there's the hull. Then we want to drag our engine up onto the hull. We want our cockpit onto the hull. Then the console is going to go onto the cockpit. Then let's see, we had L yoke and R yoke go onto the console. Then L stick and R stick go onto the cockpit. And the engine, let's see, engine, cockpit, console, and yokes all turn into a ZYX. So to select those that way individually, I just hold the control key while I click on them. Okay. Then the sticks, we're going to grab those and set those to a YZX. And we want our hull set to YZX. Now the rest of this stuff is all leg pieces. So let's see. We want to take these engine right and left engine joints and drag those onto the engine. And those are going to stay XYZ. Okay. So now let's grab the rest of these and just temporarily we're going to make all of them YZX just so we know we've generally got them in place. So now let's grab L leg top. Where did that go? There we go. And we'll drag that onto L engine joint. Then from the top we go to L shin. Then from L shin we're going to go to L ankle. Then L ankle is going to have, and I had forgotten when I was showing you guys on the last setup here that I did actually divide that piston into piston top and piston bottom. So here we have L piston top, L, yes, and then L foot piston, and I do believe, yes, I do believe that's correct. I want to double check, because I think I did have to play around with some stuff to get the effect I wanted here. So let's see. Piston. Okay, I have that backwards in here. So L foot piston goes to ankle. L piston top goes on there. Okay. And almost messed that up. There's the foot and pistons. Now we need to grab L foot front and L foot rear, change both of those to ZYX, and then we're going to drop each of those onto the L foot. Okay, so now that left leg is complete. Now we can do the right leg. So here's our leg top, our shin, our ankle. Then we're going to have our foot piston, our piston top, our foot. Then we'll take the foot front and foot rear, set those to ZYX. And we're going to drag foot front onto the foot, then foot rear onto the foot. Now that leg is in place. And the last thing we need is to drag the hatch onto the hull. Okay. So now let's just go back out here in our viewport, and when I hit create, boom, there we now have a new version of that mech in place with all those joints, and they should already have their, yes, when you create them this way, it automatically hides those translations, and it goes ahead and names your rotations, bend, twist, and side to side. Whereas when you create them manually, you have X, Y, and Z rotate. So now when you load this in this way, though, you're going to see that these all have this kind of rubbery bending going on. First off, that's because it's using the old poser rigging method. So we need to lock all those joints, but before we can do that, we need to convert it to general weight mapping. So let's go to Edit, Figure, Rigging, and convert figure to weight mapping, and we're going to choose General. Okay, and it's going to try to convert those values into these weights. So now if we go into our node weight map brush, you can see the kind of joints, the kind of weights that it puts on there. This is an easy fix using the same method that I used to set up the weights on the previous version of this figure. You guys are actually getting to see me do the basics of rigging this twice. So let's right click and go to weight editing and go to fill by bone selection. So now you see we get that all locked off. Okay. Then from here we need to go through and adjust all our origin and end points. So let's grab this left shin and move this just like we did before when we were creating bones. Okay, so there you see really two different ways to go about getting your joints in place. That's probably the hardest part, I believe, in building a piece like this, building a figure like this, is getting all those joints in place, you know, making sure your naming's all good, the tedium of linking up all the poly groups to those joints so that you have those selections and everything. So, you know, that's kind of the tedious part, but that's what I wanted to show you here, because if you pre-plan it and you have a good idea of where all those tools are, you can get into it and get out of it pretty easily. It's not difficult, it's just a matter of knowing where everything is. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these two guys that I just made and jump over into my finished mech so that I can show you guys some of the features that are built into this one. Okay, and this is what will be there for release. So let's actually kick him out and load him in. There's also another little thing, a little aside that I want to show. So let's load this guy up. And you'll notice this says set. That's because this is not loading just the figure. It's also loading a secondary figure that I built. That's kind of another little addendum. See, sometimes when you're doing mechanical stuff, you might want to have little enhancements or little pieces of rigging that kind of add detail. And sometimes having all that rigging inside the one figure is a bit cumbersome and hard to work with. It just presents some issues. You can break that up into smaller chunks and rig different pieces and then combine them together and save them as a scene subset. And so like here you can see I have this nifty little system in place, because the more I looked at it, I was like, man, that hatch didn't make sense. I didn't have hinges on it. I didn't want externally visible hinges either. I wanted it to feel like it would seal shut nice and tight. So what I've done is I've built this system
of these little hydraulic pieces here. And then those link through ERC to the hatch. So then when we move it, we open and close it, you can see how those pieces work. You can see the way that that slides back and forth in the track. And frankly, the process of creating that would take probably about another hour to show. So I don't really have time to get into that today. But yeah, that's a second figure. So if we go into our scene and look, you'll see this is what we see in the scene. But if we open that up and go down, you'll see another figure in here that's actually parented to the hull. So that's all about the little things, you know, it's the little things that matter. So the last thing that I want to do today is bring in a G3 figure and pose that figure in place with the cockpit. Okay, so let's load up a G3 female, and that's fine. And if you guys go all the way back to the very beginning of this series, right, you'll remember that when I modeled this figure, this ship, where I started from was not the ship or the ship concept. I actually started from the G3 figure. I posed the figure in something that to my imagination looked like she would be driving this thing, sent that to Zbrush, and then built everything around it so it was a completely ergonomic design. So I should still have, I hope, there we go, I still have that pose saved out. So if I click that now, and let's put some clothes on this girl. Let's go find some clothing. I'm sure I have something sitting around in here somewhere. Let's go. People, 3 female clothing. Let's just grab the basic stuff. You know, the basic default stuff. We'll just drag and drop that on her, just so she's not all naked on our screen. All right. So, since we built the mech around her pose, it should generally fit, although in the course of modeling the stuff, you can end up obviously, you know, having things that kind of shift and move and all that. So, and I try not to be too by the book on it. You know, if I don't want to be too bound by things. So, what we'll do here is, this is just kind of a neat little trick I'm going to show you guys about, you know, posing something that's obscured. So let's go to a front view, select our ship, and then I'm going to go to my geometry editor. And this is something, this is actually just a general usage tip. This is something that applies to just general use and creating artwork in DS, but it's something that I think people hardly ever, I don't know anybody else who does this. I've never seen this from anybody else before. And so you guys are welcome to take this tip and share it and all kinds of stuff, but it's super cool. Right, so here we're trying to pose this figure, but we can't really see her because she's inside this. Now we could hide bits and pieces, but hiding that stuff's going to be tricky. So what we could do is go into our geometry editor, right, and let's change our selection mode to a marquee, and then let's just drag that marquee over about half of that mesh. Now right click and go to geometry visibility and hide selected. Now let's select her, frame her, and now we can see right through here what we need. Okay, so now let's take a look at her.
Does she have any posing on the actual root? Because we don't want the root posed at all. Nope, that's good. So we should be able to just grab her hip and lift her up a bit. And that should get us pretty close to what we want. Okay. And then from here, I might just go in here and make some slight little changes. Let's maybe bend this. And if I change the posing and kind of alter this stuff a bit, and I find that I need more room in the cockpit, then I can just send the model over to Zbrush, change that shape, and then just send it back over and overwrite the underlying shape, and it's all going to work out really well. So let's go right to left, selected recursive. There's a Shift Y to do the mirroring on that, by the way. So here she can put her feet up like that, or maybe it'd be better if we bend the legs back a little and have the feet down like that. Either way is fine. Okay, so here, selected recursive, left to right. Okay, cool, cool. And then let's just grab her arms. Let's move those around a little bit. And even though I started with a pose that I made, I mean, if I wanted, I could stick really close to that pose. I could, you know, and I could have followed that super tight and been very stringent about it the whole time. But it's just as well to use it as a guide more than anything else, and then tweak things at the end. So here, right. There's some little things that I might want to tweak. Like I might want to change the shape or size of that handle on the yoke there a little bit. At this point, we can fine-tune this to death. Oop. And that's what we're going to do with this, is really go in and fine-tune it a little bit more. There we go. Kind of digging that. We can make that pose a little more natural right there. That's not bad. That's not bad at all. Alright, do we see any place where we want to tweak anything? I don't know, it's tempting. It's actually not bad. I kind of like that. I'm thinking that's good. So, let me just pop over here into my content library, and under poses, let's see. I am going to stick with this structure that everybody uses, although I really don't like it. To me, I feel like it would be better just to put her pilot pose in here, but I'm going to stick with what everybody's used to. Yeah. So let's add some folders. We need to add Genesis 3 female, then a subfolder for poses, and then dark void mech ATW, I think is what I'm calling this. I don't know. I'm getting kind of bleary-eyed now. So, dark void. It's just dark void ATW. There we go. So let's come back in here. Grab that. And I'll just select her. And then this is going to be simple pose, and this is going to be ATW pilot. And I want to remove general and pose controls and then leave everything else there in place. So let's hit accept. Okay, now if I restore the figure, I should be able to apply that pose. Leave limits on. I have my stuff set up so that it always fires that off, by the way, just so you know. So there we go. That pops right into place. So from there, to use this, I would take her, Genesis 3 female, and parent her to, let's see, change her parent. And we're going to parent her to the hull of the Dark Void ATW. Or we could parent her to the cockpit. I think I'll go with, let's parent her to the cockpit just because it sounds better. Okay, so now that she's parented there, we are ready to roll. This thing's ready to go stomping around. Maybe go play some soccer with it. So I want to pop back into my geometry editor after selecting the mech, and we're going to restore our visibility. And so there we see our figure. We have our driver right there in the mech, and we are good to go. So there you guys have it. You have the general gist of rigging. Now, like I said, there are some little things like adding these hydraulic hinges. That was tricky. There's some tricky stuff going on in that. I'm not going to lie about it. I'll give you a quick little glimpse of what is up with that by clicking on this hatch, and you'll see if I go to show in property hierarchy here, you're going to see where there's some black magic voodoo going on with this stuff. There's a thing called hinge controls, and if I go into that, you'll see we've got all kinds of little stuff going on there. So that, like I said, that I could probably do at least a solid hour on just how that little thing is set up. That is some of my under the hood voodoo. But the gist of all this you guys saw today, and actually saw twice. You saw two different forms of how a piece like this can come together really, really quickly. So I hope that has made some sense, and hopefully you guys have picked up some cool stuff from this. It is time for us to bring today's session to a close. If there are any questions or comments, I am free now to check out the chat and see what everybody has to say. Next week we're going to be dealing with some more posing, adding a few more poses for the Genesis figures in with the mech, adding some poses for the mech itself, which I've already got a couple done that are really pretty nifty. Let me fire one of these up for you because this is kind of cool. Like let's use walking. Okay. Let's just leave that on. And if you guys check out on our YouTube channel, there are a couple of test videos up where you see some of these guys in place and doing their thing. So there we go. So I'm very big on animating things, even though I know most users don't actually animate. I love animating, and I love having animated poses for things, so whenever I can I try to include at least a couple of those. Next week we're going to be looking at really the finishing little touches, setting up some renders. There's just it's kind of the wrap up. Next week will be kind of a wrap up week on the Dark Void Mechanical series. So you're going to see some stuff about creating the promo art that will be on this when the kit comes out. Maybe saving a few more poses. Like I said, it's wrap up week on this series. So over in the chat, let's see.
Russ Barrett says it's a crime there's not more animation going on. Yeah, I agree, man. It blows my mind with the volume of people there are in this stuff that you know, that there aren't more of them animating. It's just such a cool thing to do. So oh, that's great. That's great. So it's kind of cool. I've glanced over a few times. It looks like folks were having some fun in the chat today. That's a good thing. I'm glad you guys were enjoying yourselves. It looks like some folks were sharing some interesting drink recipes or something. That's kind of cool. Really dig all the conversation that I was seeing too about stuff, you know, places we could go with this, where we could take this sort of thing into different game engines and stuff like that. Anyway, I want to thank you guys as always for coming out, watching, hanging out with us, talking, and all that kind of stuff. Hope Mr. Jason, Mr. 3D Loki, gets to feeling a little better. I know he's kind of had to bail on us today. Thanks to him and Terry and all the folks at CGBytes for putting these things together. Until next week, when we're going to be wrapping up the Mechanical series, I am Les from 6S1. This is CGBytes, and thank you guys for hanging out. Bye-bye.